Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this month's CMTA webinar, Back to School with the CMTA, as you can see on your screen there with Sarah Kesty. And my name is Bob Christensen. I'll be the moderator this evening. And just want to say welcome to everybody. And Sarah, I've had a chance to talk with her a little bit this evening before we get on the air here. I think you're in for a wonderful talk and a treat from somebody who not only has CMT, but somebody who works with children in the school every day. So for you parents out there who have kids going to school, I think you're going to find this to be a really excellent presentation. Before I turn it over to Sarah, I just want to point out a couple things in the right-hand side of your screen. Most of it's on the right-hand side anyway. You'll see an area for questions. Feel free to shoot questions out as they come up throughout the presentation. I'm going to take those questions as best I can, and if they pertain to a particular slide, I'll jump in and let Sarah know what the question is about that slide and so forth. Otherwise, we'll save them to the end. If they're appropriate, we can answer them all. So again, if you have questions, just type them in there, and we'll get them right away, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to get started, and I'll go enjoy the evening. Sarah?
Hi. All right, I will get started. That was perfect introduction time for me to go grab my phone charger just in case. So thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm really looking forward to the information I have. Please, like Bob said, if you have questions, I don't mind being interrupted. I'm very passionate about this stuff, so I can definitely keep track of where I am in the presentation, so don't feel like you are interrupting at all. So back to school. I feel excited and depressed at the same time when I see that Target commercial come on, because that's always a high anxiety time for teachers and students, but also a really exciting time. So I applaud you for taking the time to get the year set up really well for your child, and hopefully the tips I have will be helpful. I apologize in advance if some of you are like, oh my goodness, I know some of this stuff, but I really tried to make it a big blanket, and it might be a good reminder for some of the technical stuff for 504s, IEPs, that sort of thing. So without further ado, here we go. Back to school with CMTA. Oops, and now my computer's not moving. I'm sorry, everybody. Hang on just a second. How is that possible? All right. I'm frozen. Darn, Bob, hang on just a second. Let me see if I can get this going. Well, and I do apologize, and I also remember my first slide. So I wanted to share with everyone that when we get started with, oops, here we go. Yay. All right, look at that. Okay, are we back on? Can everybody, Bob, can you see?
Yeah, we're fine. We're good.
Good. Okay, whatever I did before, I'm not going to do that again and mess it up. So something you might wonder about is how to explain CMT to school staff. I know sometimes when I explain it, I'm really tempted to get into the technical pieces of hereditary neuropathy and the statistics and all that kind of stuff, but and it's certainly not a diss on teachers, because, you know, I am one, but keep it short and simple. We like to say keep it short and sweet, like KISS, so it's easy to remember, because the teachers, especially when you come to them at the beginning of the year, they're going to want to know what to do. That's the ultimate question in their mind. So if you just explain, you know, my child's affected in this way, and you might see this, and he might need help with that, that's a heck of a lot more useful. And then you can give the information to the teacher, and 9 times out of 10, you know, on a Saturday, they'll be like, oh man, I heard about this disability and I want to learn more. And then they'll research, and it'll be more palatable because their brains will be more available. So just remember to keep it kind of well packaged if you can. I think that would help a lot. Another thing, when you explain it to the school staff, make sure that you talk to the nurse, the PE teacher, any classroom aides that might work in there. And then also a great idea, and I know I appreciated this as an RSP teacher, and RSP stands for Resource Specialist. It's just the mild, moderate special education teacher that every campus has. You know, connect with either the school counselor or the RSP teacher, because they provide satellite services, and what that means is they don't have their own classroom, so they're a great person that can kind of be the school mom, so to speak, to check in on your student, your child, and make sure that everything's okay. And oftentimes they're also the people who manage the paperwork for the accommodations that we'll talk about a little bit later. So it's great to get on their good side and introduce yourself, make sure they're aware. Another great thing to note when you talk to the school staff is your child's awareness of CMT and his or her acceptance of it. And this was huge, because when I was in school, I would have dropped dead if someone had said CMT and my name in the same sentence. I was very embarrassed. I didn't have a very good understanding of it, partially because I didn't have the information, and partially because I was very closed off to it. And it took, I was sharing with Bob, almost 30 years for me to be okay with it. And you know, some days I'm still not. So make sure you let the teacher know it's okay to talk about it in front of people, or it's not. And that's really up to your child. So being sensitive about that seems like a small thing, but that will go a huge way, and you want to make sure that the teacher knows that as well, because once you get into that portion of your brain that's anxious, that kind of primal fight or flight, there's absolutely no memory going on. And I can tell you, if you're embarrassed, you're definitely not going to be learning. So something to consider. So another thing to think about is how you explain it to the children. And you don't have to explain CMT to the students, but eventually it's going to come up, you know, why does Jimmy sit there during PE, or why does he need to take a stretch break, or something like that. And so I've really come to see in my experience that avoiding something like, oh, we don't talk about that, is sort of like giving it power. It's giving it power to embarrass. It's giving it mystery. It's giving it negative connotation. So if you can acknowledge it, even in a way that does not even say disability or CMT, it just says, you know, a challenge or a difference. I'm going to teach you a few things coming up in the slides ahead about how to do that. But, you know, it is important to address it with the class. And it's not necessarily, you don't even have to say, this is for my son Jimmy. You could just come in as a book reader, and I'm going to recommend some books. Or you could come in as someone who really cares about all people, and you want to tell the class about the differences of all people. And you could even mix in a few other disabilities, or work with the teacher to kind of have some other things covered, so that it's not isolating for your child, but it's more of an experience of making all the students more aware and better global citizens, really. But, you know, from our perspective, it is all about making sure that our CMT kids are okay. But, I mean, what a cool gift to be able to help others. Another thing when you're explaining CMT to children, remember that they have very short attention spans, and although you may know a ton about CMT, I think it was Einstein who said the person who can encapsulate their message in a way that's palatable for the audience is one of the most brilliant people. And I think that's true here too. If you can get your point across in a way that's palatable, memorable, and doesn't have negative connotations like disability or special or any of those words that kind of make those of us in the community shudder a little bit, then you're doing phenomenally well. And that's the power of considering. The next thing I have for you is kind of where students are as they age. So in kindergarten and first grade, they're kind of me focused, and that's not a criticism, it's just where their brains are. Friendships are defined by, you know, oh, well, so-and-so shared his popsicle, so he's my best friend. You know, they're very flighty. and play is the primary focus. As you get into second and third grade, friendships are kind of developing. So you're seeing like, oh, Nancy and Alicia play together all the time, and they're becoming more solid based on shared activities. So and children are also starting to notice differences between them. And this is like the blurt out time where they might say like, oh, what's wrong with your, and then they'll think and say, oh shoot, I hurt somebody's feelings. So this is a critical time to start pointing out, like, look at the natural feedback that students get from the environment. Like, well, look, honey, when you said that, this person's face grimaced, and that means they don't feel good about it. Or, just examples to kind of clue your child into, like, whoa, there's this whole social world, and people have their own independent thoughts and motivations. And because second and third grade, it's starting to develop, but the real juicy age is third to fifth grade. And that's when their brains actually are ready for empathy. And we'll talk a little bit more about empathy in just a bit. But empathy is basically the ability to walk in someone else's shoes. So their brains are actually, and you'll notice this even with reading comprehension, they're able to kind of get inside of a character and understand what they're going through. And this is when books might actually make them cry because they can actually feel it now. And friendships are more established. So this is the time when isolation is usually more impacting on self-esteem, because a lot of the times it is semi-permanent, and it's also occasionally intentional. So we'll talk kind of how to deal with that. And this is the third through fifth grade age is when a lot of the social development and bully prevention curriculums are aimed for. This is a really good time, if you have time to volunteer in classrooms, to go in and help with that kind of stuff. And I'll give you some resources later on if you are ready to join those of us doing that, because it's amazingly rewarding. And think about the citizens that we're making if we do that. 6th through 12th grade, this covers such a big span, but they share so many similar characteristics. I didn't really break it down between junior high and high school, although junior high, again, is one of those juicy, like, it's like their second toddlerhood. Like, all of a sudden they don't know how to do anything, and they don't know how to feel and all of that. But as far as the social impact and the social emotional learning, it's pretty similar. This is where we see best friendships emerge. This is where we see, very, very steady friendships. And if they have a fight, it's a big deal. If they're not friends anymore, it's not just a statement. It's, an ordeal that they go through. And social is the primary focus for this age span. So there's a lot of pressure to fit in. There's a lot of worry about wanting to be accepted, but then this is usually when you see like the kids that will kind of spin off and say, well, I'm independent, I'm just so different, I'm different like all these other kids that are different like me. So and it's funny to laugh about now, but of course when you're in it, it's very serious. So and then talk about brain development. Again, this is a huge part of their lives, where the emotional piece and the hormone piece is just impacting so much. And the part of your brain that develops to be able to consider long-term consequences and then make decisions based on that doesn't kick in until usually after high school. That's when it's really, really well developed. So you're going to see a lot of like confused faces when you say like, what were you thinking? And they honestly can't articulate it. That's what's going on right here. So this is another little juicy time, definitely an exciting time in their lives, but also a time where our kids with CMT are going to be comparing themselves a lot to others. So this is a time when, if you were going to go into the class, definitely talk with your child about, do you want this to be a CMT presentation or a all kinds of disabilities presentation? Do you want me as your mom to identify myself and my role and why I'm here, or do you want me to just kind of talk about all different people? And really, you can personalize your approach, but if you isolate your child at this point, just through your well-intended motions, this is going to have a huge social impact. So how can we create empathetic classrooms if we're ready to go in there and do it? Again, like I said, empathy is being able to feel something that you can put yourself in someone else's shoes. You're actually feeling with them. You're feeling as they do. Whereas sympathy is like, oh, that's too bad. I feel for you. So it's a slight difference, but empathy is where we want to be with students. Sympathy can almost edge on the border of pity, and that's really undermining for our empowerment efforts. So we want to see empathetic students, because if you can take somebody's perspective and you see them being bullied, oh my goodness, you're going to stand up because that's what you would want in that situation. And if you can take somebody's perspective about feeling embarrassed, you know, you're going to think twice to make fun of them, because what if that was you? So empathy is huge, huge, huge in bully prevention, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. But just a good slide to remind us what empathy is, since I'm going to be referencing it a lot. So if you go into a classroom and you're ready to talk, and it's not, if you want to take the angle of not necessarily just CMT, and you can do both, so I'm not saying either or, but the most effective suggestion I've found is just taking an approach, and I've sort of coined it, everyone has something, and it's been incredibly powerful. So on my website, which I'll give you guys at the end, there is a PowerPoint that you can use, and it just shows celebrities and their challenges and their disabilities, and also I wrote a book about it too, so you're welcome to use that too. But it just kind of shows how everyone does have a something. And I know this first point says lay the foundation with real talk. And what that means is go ahead, acknowledge that sometimes this stuff stinks. And you can talk to the teacher ahead of time whether or not they think sucks is a cuss word. That's why I usually say stinks just in case. But, you know, like, my goodness, it really is hard to have a challenge. And the second point, ask questions to explore perspectives. That would be like, man, if you only had one arm, boy, you know what? Pretend like you're tying your shoe. What's that like? Okay, now take one hand behind your back. Now try it. And usually students are kind of like floored because it's something they've never experienced. And instead of getting up in front of the class and saying, this is how you would experience life if you had one hand, you know, I sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, but what I'm trying to get to is that that dictates how they're supposed to feel, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to go wah, 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 just like I did. So instead, ask questions to explore perspectives, really dive into the character's experience. That will give the lasting impact of empathy. Another huge thing is to make the invisible visible, and you can do this with questions. So, you know, can you see John's disability? Let's pretend he has difficulty reading. Can you see his something? Can you see his challenge? Huh. Then how do we know it's there? You know, things like that. Like, what experience do you think would be really difficult if you were John? And instead of saying for John or kind of taking that outsider perspective, if you can angle the question so that they ask the students to see it from that perspective, that's empathy, and that's the bridge between sympathy and empathy, are these questions. I think I talked a little bit about don't avoid the uncomfortable. What I mean is just don't shush the kids. If you know, I mean, you're going to have a good sense of where the students are with accepting and thinking about and talking about a disability. And if you're uncomfortable talking about it, or the teacher is, you know, find someone who's willing to take it on, because it's there whether we look at it or not. It's there whether we talk about it or not. And the best way to handle it is to address it. And you can address it under the umbrella of everyone has something. This is so-and-so something. And that just kind of alleviates that mystery, that pressure, that negative connotation, and a lot of the assumptions that the students are making, because they're learning from their environment and what they observe. If we can set it up to be facts that they're learning rather than false assumptions, again, like, think about the citizens that we're making. And feel free, if you want to share this with your child's teacher or have them reach out, and I can provide some resources if you're not comfortable going in the classroom, which is totally fine. I'm happy to help set up the teacher, or maybe even do a school visit if you want me to come out. That would be fun too. So I'll give you all my contact info at the end. So the last point, choose the teacher well. I love my profession. I know there's going to be a couple points in this slide where I could be in trouble with my peers, but let's face it, teachers are human, and some teachers are going to adapt really well to, like, oh my goodness, you know, some teachers will be empathetic, like, wow, that's got to be a real challenge. Of course I'll give him extra time to change a PE, or, you know, sure, he can have a copy of my notes at the end if writing's difficult. You know, you're going to encounter those people who might even beat you to the punch and think of better accommodations than you're even asking for, which is amazing. And seriously, like, Starbucks gift card that teacher because he or she deserves it. But you're also going to be, I think I just made a verb out of Starbucks gift card too. You also will run into teachers who are very burdened by the modifications and accommodations, who maybe are towards the end of their careers or are feeling overwhelmed and just aren't in the mood to deal with this. And, you know, if it comes to the point where it's blocking your child from success, it's okay to politely talk with the principal and say, you know, is there another classroom option for my child? Because, you know, what your child reports is very valid, and what you observe is very important. And you have to think, like, this teacher, if he's not willing to accommodate, is probably not thinking very highly, or is kind of annoyed by your student, by your child, and that's just not an environment you want to put your child into. So if you come across that, you know, it really is okay to ask to switch, and it's nothing personal. It's just something that just as important as the accommodations and modifications is to have an empathetic, supportive teacher that's willing to work well with you. Oops. So back to developing empathy. I'm probably the empathy queen. I love it. So these suggestions came from a program that I have the information about for you. It's called Red Rover, and it's actually an animal advocacy group that does a lot of rescue and things like that. But what they also do is provide readers to come into your classroom and develop empathy. And of course, since they do animals, they do empathy stories developing animal characters. You can easily take this with many, many, many books, and it helps with reading comprehension, so there's no way to lose with this. But the basic idea is that children are learning from their peers as much, if not more, than they are learning from us and their teachers. And so we can capitalize on that learning environment by pulling ourselves out of the conversation and sort of rigging it so that they come to this great conclusion that you set up, but that they think they thought of. And I know all the moms out there are going like, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. Like, you have to get your kid to think that they thought of the idea, and then maybe even your husband, and then boom, like, they think it's the greatest idea ever. And in your mind, you're thinking like, I've been saying that. That's this. But it doesn't sound preachy when you do it. So what you do is you take a book that has a lot of grit, a lot of character experience that the students can also experience, and you just ask questions. So you read the page. The first scene in my book is a young lady that was born with one arm, and she's playing basketball. And so I might ask, like, how, how do you think the world is different for Kim? And she was the example I gave about tying your shoe. And instead of adding anything or judging the answer, you just ask the question and you listen. And if you can't hear the response or it's from the back of the room, you repeat it, you acknowledge it, you don't judge it. And this sounds like, oh yeah, of course, I can repeat what a kid says. But sometimes it is incredibly hard not to put the spin or add your little 2 cents or like, he should have listened to his mom, shouldn't he? You know, that sort of deal that we just naturally do because we're looking to instruct. Here, you take off that instructor hat and you ask that the students respond and the students take on the character's perspectives. And sometimes their ideas will be way out there and you're going to want to step in and say like, what are you thinking? Like, no, that's ridiculous. Don't. Give them the chance to self-monitor because they're going to notice the tone and the feeling and the other students' faces, and they will self-monitor. They will come to the conclusion that that was a little bit off. It's a big leap of faith, trusting that the kids will come to empathetic understandings of kindness, but they always do. And the understandings they come up with are stated in their own words, so they're very palatable and meaningful. And I can't overemphasize this this approach. So even if you're just doing this with read-alouds at home, bedtime stories, that sort of deal, it's definitely a very powerful way to understand and come to empathetic conclusions. And also, if your child is having a hard time with bullies or kids making fun of him, this is a great way to pick a story with a bully in it and take the bully's perspective and think about like, man, what happened to this kid to make him so rotten inside? And, you know, I mean, you're not obviously going to say that because rotten's a judgment, but you can kind of get your child to go through the experiences of the bully and kind of come up with a better understanding that it's about the bully himself and how he feels rather than about your child. And sometimes that understanding, that disconnection with not feeling so victimized but almost feeling bad for the bully is incredibly powerful when you're in the situation where, you know, it feels hopeless when you're being bullied. So that's another great way to use empathy. Books and resources, and don't panic, you don't have to write this all down because this will be available on the webinar, but my book, of course, everyone has something. There's a whole bunch of other books about just celebrating mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to have a challenge. And there's a couple books in here that really support that growth mindset of the idea that if you celebrate the challenge, you're way more likely to improve in a situation. They've even shown that you can improve your IQ. So your fantastic elastic brain, things like that kind of show that with perseverance, anything is possible. So these are great books. There's a ton more out there. And then I also added the Red Rover information if you wanted to check them out and request. I know California has a whole bunch of readers available, but they are a national group, so you can check them out and maybe even see if you can do an online training to become a reader yourself, because it's an incredible program and very simple from the start of it, and then you see how profound it is. So some great resources if you wanted to share them with the teacher or get in there and do it yourself. Okay, nitty-gritty time. Take a breath. And maybe I'm talking to myself. So available school support. So before we even look at 504s and IEPs, if you just go to the teacher and say, hey, this is what makes my kid successful, can we figure out a way to do this? Sometimes that works. My advice would be go ahead and get at least a 504, and we'll talk about what that means in just a second, just so that it ensures that it's a plan that follows your child. It's a school-to-school plan. It's something that goes grade to grade, because like we said, teachers are human, and one year you may have one that just hung the moon, and then another year you might have a grump. So these documentations are great to support the accommodations and things like that that your child might need year to year, and it documents what they need. So the main difference between these two is that 504 plans level the playing field. They accommodate and modify anything that your child needs to be able to access education. So these are things like where he or she sits, or the time allotted to go get a drink, or bathroom breaks, or getting notes copied for them instead of having to write them down. All these types of changes that we can make within a classroom, within a school, that allow your child to access the full school experience, sort of like bridge the gap that having CMT created. But there are no services. So if your child was in need of something like occupational therapy, which is on the slide to the right called OT, physical therapy, PT, resource specialists, like things to help with learning, those sort of deals, those services would be included in an IEP. And the IEP is an individualized education plan. This is a little bit different. So if you think about 504 as in like changes within the classroom and school, an IEP documents that, but then it also adds a service if your child is found to have an educational need. So it sounds very fancy, but basically the difference is IEPs require an assessment from the school team, so the school psychologist, usually a special ed teacher, and then sometimes an occupational therapist or a physical therapist or an adaptive PE teacher, somebody like that, to look at, does having CMT impact their education to the point that they need services to bridge that gap. And it's a tough call. It's something that you can talk with your school about, which one you want, all that sort of deal, and which one would make more sense. And if you have any questions, or if you're feeling like you're kind of getting pushback from the school, my information is at the end of this, and you can definitely reach out for help. So how do you even get this started? Well, generally I say write a letter, and that's not necessarily because it's the legal standpoint, although that does give you some legs, but generally schools are incredibly busy places, and you want to have this documented so that it's getting the ball rolling for you in an effective way. It won't make anybody frustrated, and your child won't slip through the cracks. So you have two choices. If you feel like, you know what, we can make this work within the classroom, I don't want my child to be taken out of class for any extra services because he or she doesn't need them, we can just figure this out with an in-class plan, then a 504 is right for you. So this would have been probably what I needed in school, although I was on an IEP for speech, so I had it anyway. But, just changing things to give me extra time to write if I needed it, or PE modifications, that sort of deal would have been perfect. But there's also the time when you need to ask for, and I gave you kind of a direct quote, an assessment to see if your child needs an IEP. So that's okay to ask for as well. And the school has the right to say no if they don't see CMT impacting your child's education. But I gave you a few examples here. So if you're seeing like, your child's ability to use his hand is really diminishing and he needs to be taught by an occupational therapist how to use adaptive technology, then that would be the time where it really is impacting his education. He's not able to complete work or get, type into the computerized assessments right now for Common Core, that sort of deal. That would be a very legitimate time to say, hey guys, can we meet and see if we can sign an assessment plan, if we can assess to determine whether or not my child needs services. Or, you know, your son or daughter is being affected in their gross motor movements to the point where adaptive PE would be appropriate. So an entirely different PE program, usually in addition to regular PE, unfortunately, it kind of doubles your child's PE experience. But, you know, let's say that your child is in transition between braces and a wheelchair, or would really benefit from learning to move his or her body through space and kind of gain some more proprioceptive skills. That would be a time when OT or even physical therapy would be appropriate and something that would have an educational benefit. So I hope that that was clear. It's, you know, it's in the class changes versus services. That's the main differences. An IEP would have services plus in the class changes. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So whether or not it's a 504 or an IEP, remember that if you change schools, this is a living document that stays valid between schools. So take it to the next school and say, hey, my kid's on a 504. I also brought you some cookies, and then wink at them. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I'm not. But, you know, make sure that the school itself has that information. Both documents are updated yearly, and you need to give permission to make those updates. The next point is really big. So these meetings can be incredibly intimidating, or, you know, depending on where you are with acceptance, and it's totally fine not to be accepting of this diagnosis yet for your child. It can be really depressing and really overwhelming. So if you sit at one of these meetings and you just feel like you need some time to kind of stew on it, it's absolutely okay to sign attendance and say, yes, I participated in the meeting, and then just ask gently, you know, hey, can I have some time to think about this? I want to take it home and review it. And you'll get a copy of the document, and then you'll be able to go home and say, okay, well, we documented that my child gets a copy of notes, but, ooh, I forgot to ask for, and you can kind of add it in. And then they'll change the document, give you time to review it again, and then you can proceed. Just keep in mind that you can't really hold the document hostage, because until you sign, none of the supports go into effect that are on that present document. So work with the school team. Sometimes it scares teachers when you say you want time to think about it, because they think that you're bringing it to a lawyer. So I know I've been in that situation where I'm like, what? I didn't do a good job. Oh my goodness, because I'm, you know, writing these IEPs. But it's nothing personal. It's just your right to remember that. And if you're totally fine, if you're absolutely satisfied and you feel like, man, I have the best IEP ever, sign away. That is totally great. But I think a lot of parents feel the pressure to sign right away, and then they lament it, and they come to me and say, man, I wish I had asked for. And although you do have the right to call an IEP meeting at any time, it's just one more hurdle that you could deal with, you know, in the reviewing of the document. This is another bullet I feel like my peers would not be pleased with me, but you can read between the lines. The school districts are budget-minded. So sometimes you're going to be met with a forceful no. And that can be very frustrating and very, very, you know, damage your spirit, because here you are trying to be a cheerleader and an advocate for your kid, and you're getting this feedback that, no, we're not going to provide OT, or no, we don't do adaptive PE at our school, things like that. And that's hard. It's very hard, and you have a very valid reason to feel frustrated. Just be prepared to be firm and persistent. You know, we're ultimately all on the same team. Sometimes the school team is pressured a little bit to limit the number of students that receive certain services, because sometimes the school districts have to contract with people, and that costs a lot of money, and I understand. I mean, there's just a budget that we have to meet. So ultimately, we're on the same team. We all want your child's success. So since I've been on both sides of the table, I can understand both sides and definitely know that it's frustrating on both ends. But remember, you have legal rights that you can access through the next slide. And then, you know, kill them with kindness. Make sure you remember and focus on the fact that this is for your child, not to prove anybody wrong or anything like that. So there's kind of great cool resources through the CMTA, and I know that we're getting a facelift on our website. So these are actually hyperlinked right now, so you can, you know, click Archie the Turtle if you wanted to go meet him or go to the Guide for Schools. Don't do it now, though, because I want you here. But when we actually, I think this is my screen, so you guys can't click your hostages. When you do these, they'll be live for a little bit, and then I'm going to have to go in and switch them up. So be prepared if you get like a this isn't sound screen. I will work on it very soon. But we have the Guide for Schools that I helped co-write, and this is amazing. Print this, bring it to your school, again, with a batch of cookies. It won't hurt. And to say, like, hey, check this out when you have a chance. But again, here's my short and simple synopsis of CMT, and this is what I need you to do for my child. And here's more information. And who knows, maybe they'll be inspired to even run a fundraiser. I know I had a child a couple years ago, a student with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and we got very enthused as a school and then as a district to help do some awareness and fundraising and stuff. So you never know what the Guide for Schools could bring. There's a kind of more in-depth article about 504s and IEPs that I wrote a while back that's on the website. We're working on a guide for school nurses, so that'll be nice to have available. And then there's a link to IDEA, is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the law, the set of laws that gives our students with disabilities services through IEPs. So there's kind of a rundown of your parental rights if your child is on an IEP. And it's just nice to review and think about. I can't believe no one's had a question. It's kind of freaking me out, but I hope you guys are getting good information. So start the school year right. I really tried to picture what are the things that I recommend for my students, what are the things I recommend for my special ed students, and then what are the things that worked for me. So these are kind of top 4. Walk the campus. I mean, even as if you have a child that does not have walking difficulties, walk the campus, take a preview, make sure you kind of do a dry run when no one's around to laugh if you can't find your class. And if your child's not in junior high or high school, walk the campus to make sure that you understand how far the bathroom is and where you go if you need to see the nurse. Those sort of things can lower anxiety immensely. And think about, you know, talk about empathy. Think about if you were a child with walking difficulties and you're in your class having a great art lesson and then all of a sudden it hits you that you need to go potty. If you have walking difficulties and the bathroom is, you know, clear across campus, you may have an accident. So those are the sort of things that I think as adults we take for granted because we're not hostages to a school schedule. But in school, you have to get permission to go to the bathroom. So you need to start asking far enough in advance where you're not about to wet yourself because you may not be able to go right away. So those sort of deals, walking campus is great and it's fun. You can go check it out with your kid and make sure that they know where everything is. Again, I've talked about meeting with the teachers, sweetening them up, and then kind of hearing where they are with it, kind of getting a sense of how empathetic they'll be to your child, and make sure that you are able to work together as a creative team to make the year work. Shoe shopping, I know in my last webinar people said, man, you talk about shoes a lot, and I hate shoes, trust me, like I have DMT, my feet are, it's like toe anarchy in my shoes, trust me. But and I remember dreading shoe shopping at the beginning of the year because what I was always guided toward was the like Velcro-looking retiree type of shoes. And even though those probably would have made my feet feel so much better, I would not have been caught dead in them because they would have had a huge social impact. And I know it seems goofy for us because as adults, and especially as we get older, we're kind of more accepting of ourselves, but man, that is such a red flag for children and the judgment they experience. So it's going to take a while probably to find some good shoe shops, and I know, or good shoes to meet the needs of safety and security, but also, you know, not look super dorky. I know we partner with, oh, they're going to kill me because I like the rep a lot, and I cannot remember, his name's Bob, but I cannot remember, Atrix, I think. We have a shoe company through CMTA that we partner with, and they do a ton for us. And they mostly have adult shoes, but there may be some that are available for older students or those of us with bigger feet. The last suggestion really helps everybody. Honestly, it will make your life so much easier as a parent. That's just practice the bed and wake time. And normally I remember to do this about 2 days out, and then I still don't do it, and I lament it every year. So let's promise each other we'll do this year, but take about 2 weeks. It really takes about 2 weeks to reset the clock, you know, like we're used to in summertime playing outside until it gets dark, 9:30, and then kind of sleeping in. It's a big shock to anybody's body, but especially a CMT fatigue body, to have to adjust your hours. Maybe you can't sleep so early, and then you don't get enough sleep, and then you're more likely to trip, and then when you're injured, you're weaker. And, you know, it's a big, big cycle, so we want to make sure that your child's ready. So practice at bedtime, practice at wake time, and then instead of just waking them up and sitting them on the couch and saying, like, good job, you got up, it's 7 a.m., practice the morning routine. Like, we have to be out the door at 7:30 or whatever it is, so that you can kind of iron out the kinks. Maybe there's a better spot to leave the backpack. Maybe picking out the clothes at the beginning of the morning isn't the best time. Maybe you should do it at night, that sort of thing. And you can definitely even use empathy questioning to do that. So instead of saying, well, you should pick out your clothes every night before bed, you know, that should that we do to our kids, say, you know what, I wonder what your morning would be like, or what do you think your morning would be like if you already had your clothes picked out? And then just let it hang in the air, because that is so much more powerful, because ultimately your kid's going to think he or she thought of it. And what do you care? You thought of it, but you rigged it so that they would, and then it's way more powerful. It'll stick. So, you know, we need to think about getting rid of any obstacle that we might have, physical or mental or emotional, for our students. And that's getting ready and, you know, setting you up so that you don't waste a lot of your battery's energy before you even get out the door is incredibly powerful. So what about people?
I'd like to,
yes.
I just want to interrupt for a second. If we could go back one slide there. We have a question from someone who's going to be a senior in college this year, and was recently just diagnosed with CMT and is having some minor difficulties walking and falling, like we've all done many times before. But one of the questions this person has is that her hands are falling asleep while taking exams, and she was wondering how to approach the university with an issue like that.
Oh, great question, and thank you for jumping in. You can go to your university's services for students with disabilities. A lot of the times it's called DSPS. But every campus has one, and basically you provide documentation, and then they can provide you with accommodations, and they'll work with you to decide how the disability impacts your school experience. But specifically, I can think of something that you'd want to ask for, and as soon as you can, start this process, because they're open during the summer, and it's kind of a lengthy process. Sometimes there's an application, and it won't cost you any money, but they just kind of want to have their T's crossed and their I's dotted. So, and usually the stuff is available online, and it's very discreet. So it's not like you're going to have like a sticker on your ID card that says like I'm disabled. You know, it's more like you would bring the letter that the Department for Students with Disabilities at the college would write with you. And that letter would just kind of outline some of the most effective accommodations. And they'll have like a big menu available for you. And then you can kind of pick and choose. And then you just bring that to your professor at the beginning of the year and say, hey, you know, I'm identified as a DSPS student, or whatever the school calls the disability support, and you know, these are the things I'm going to need. And legally, the professors have to meet those requirements. And a couple of things I'm thinking of that would help you would be a lot of the times they'll have carbon paper available, and that's just that old school stuff that like is duplicate or triplicate. And oftentimes the professor will announce at the beginning of the semester, like, hey, we have a student that needs a little bit of note-taking support, and we'd like, you know, if you're interested in being a note taker, come see me after class. And the person who takes your notes oftentimes will be paid just like minimum wage, or I think when I did that, it wasn't even that much. So it's just kind of, you're going to end up with somebody who wants to do the right thing and who feels like they're a good note taker. And then basically they just at the end of class rip off the back sheet. They get the front, you get the back, or vice versa, and then you'll have a copy of the notes. So let's say your hand falls asleep in class, you won't miss anything. There's another accommodation where you can have permission to record every session. And so you could have, and I think they'll even, a lot of the offices for disabilities on the campus will even rent you like a little recorder, or you could even use your phone, and they'll give you permission to record the sessions, and then you can go back and, you know, revisit those. And sometimes these services on the college campuses have the coolest adaptive technology, like pens that can memorize where they were on the page when you read something or wrote something. I mean, the sky's the limit. So definitely check that out. But start as soon as you can. Just look it up on your campus website and then get going. And you know, it doesn't take much as far as doctor documentation, just something that documents your diagnosis, and then the school may ask to assess you, but chances are with CMT, they're just going to say, okay, well, let's explore what you need. So in colleges, a lot of the time, it's easier than K-12. So good luck, and please email me if you have any other questions about that. Bob, is that a sufficient answer?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much.
Okay. I didn't know if you needed to talk more. Okay. So PE. Oh my goodness. Boy, did I hate PE. I'm sure I'm getting a whole bunch of hallelujahs right now. So PE is a requirement per week, minutes per week, usually in most states. I know California has 90 minutes a week, at least our school district does, and recess doesn't count. So your child will likely encounter PE, but there are no Common Core PE standards. So all this Common Core stuff you're hearing about the standards changing, there are not Common Core. There's only math and reading right now. So, which is great because that leaves it open for teachers to accommodate and modify and all kinds of stuff. So make sure you're aware of your child's desired level of participation before you even tackle the PE situation. If it's the classroom teacher that does PE, then you've kind of got it covered. If not, you've got a couple of very important and different things to ask of the PE teacher, but these are super easy and generally really well liked by a lot of other students, because PE can be a source of anxiety for students even without physical challenges. So a great thing to ask for is just the simple don't let the kids pick their own teams. You know, there's like apps on your phone to make teams, and there's no need to do that anymore. So ask the PE teacher to use random methods to make teams. That alone will take away so much of that isolation and low feeling of, man, everybody knows I'm not good at PE, you know, that self-reflection, and just set up for a way better experience. If PE is a class that's graded, you can talk with the PE teacher about alternative grading. So when I was in junior high, they did pass-fail. And that was great because then I didn't have to worry about, well, man, if I can't walk on the balance beam, I'm going to hurt my GPA. And, you know, I was very into my GPA. So, and it was nice because it wasn't like I was having a grade punishment for having CMT. So something else to consider asking for. If PE requires changing into gym clothes, make sure that your child has a good spot for it. If he or she needs to sit, maybe access to a bench or a locker with a lock that's easy to open if dexterity is an issue. Things like that, anything that we can do to limit the frustration and the physical challenges during the day are what we need to think about. And again, if you're feeling like, man, I don't know if I thoroughly covered it, walk a mile in your child's shoes. You know, experience what they like. Okay, I'm imagining I'm walking into the locker room. Where's my locker? Do I remember my code? How do I do my lock again? You know, there's a lot on their brains of what they need to get done, and then you add in the social piece, and it's enough to make anybody else sweaty and weird. So, you know, if you're really stressed about how you make this the best school year ever for your child, just experience it from their perspective, and the challenges will pop out to you, and the possible solutions will too. It's amazing what having empathy can do. In PE, allow your child to self-limit. And then on the same token, the next point, don't limit your child based on your fears. So if you're really scared that he or she is going to be embarrassed or not be able to do something, you know, you can definitely make a plan for how to handle the what if. But if your child is adamant that he wants to try something, let him. You never know. Sometimes I even still surprise myself. So be aware that when you're offering options for sports, you're not filtering them down to just a few, you know, and make sure you obviously talk with the doctor about it. But I just know that a lot of children with disabilities experience limitations just by the options that they're given, not necessarily even by what matches their abilities. And of course, I had to put Sue Heck from the show The Middle because her parents talk behind her back and say, man, she, you know, she's bad at everything, but she's the most enthusiastic person, and she tries everything, and she gives it her best. And her quote was, make your own opportunities. And I thought, yep, that's us. That's our CMTA community. So a couple more slides. I know we've all been sitting for a while, so I hope that you're enjoying yourself. Social impact. So school is, yes, it's about academics, but let's face it, like the most important skills we get from going to school are social skills, and they're the experience we have with our peers. And having CMT definitely doesn't limit our social skills. In some ways, it probably challenges us to be better and more engaging people. I definitely have some good coping and different perspectives, but it can also have some social impact on the way we feel about ourselves and possible rejection. So keep in mind that social is a huge component, and so is play. So if your child is having a hard time at recess, think about ways that he or she can still play and be engaged. So if it's, you know, if it's very, very necessary and like a post-surgery temporary kind of deal, then you can explore some alternative recess ideas like games inside, but make sure that he or she is always with peers to meet those social needs. But like I said, that would be like last priority. I just got a note saying it's 6 o'clock, so I will rush myself a little bit. I think we've covered a lot of this. And you know what? Explore counseling if your child really needs that support, because it's difficult to be different. And I know children waver between, like, I want to be like everybody when we're little, and then high school, you want to be your own self, but you also want to super be accepted. So it's a crazy making balance, and I feel for our kids for sure. I get a lot of questions about bullying, so I want to be very quick on this. I want to go to, whoops. So there's a couple types of classroom conflicts, and don't panic, I'll come back to that slide. So sometimes it's just teasing. It's fun for everybody and it doesn't hurt anybody. In that case, adults can monitor it and it's considered harmless. If it's a conflict, it's not fun for anyone. There is a solution possible, and the children involved are pretty well balanced as far as power. And that will be an important point of distinction in a second. If it's meanness, that means someone's coming up and they're hurting somebody else on purpose, either physically or emotionally, and that's usually just one instance. And as you can see, there's a couple different solutions for each of these types of conflicts. And it's important to note what type of conflict it is, because if it's not bullying and we treat it like bullying, it would be like giving antibiotics for a broken arm. You know, it won't be an effective treatment. So we need to make sure that we know what we're observing, what we're hearing about, what we're seeing, because then we can find ways to actually resolve the problem and probably teach some coping and social skills in the process. So if it is bullying, it means that it repeats over time. It's not an isolated incident, and there's an imbalance of power between the victim and the bully. So an age difference or a size difference or some perceived popularity difference, you know, things like that. There's that imbalance where someone else feels very small compared to the others. And that is where we actually have to investigate. So as a school team, the schools have to investigate bullying. And then we can do a couple things like empathy and empower bystanders and make sure that reporting bullying is safe, those sorts of deals. So I just wanted to make sure that we kind of had an understanding of what the different types are. None of them are fun. Maybe teasing is fun, but we need to know the difference. And I'm not saying that it's not valid if your child experiences meanness or conflict and feels yucky. Like, of course, everyone would, but we need to know what type to make sure we address it correctly. So you can involve the school team. Definitely, if you think it is legitimate bullying, make sure you involve the school. And oftentimes the other student's family. I just saw an article online about a child with autism, or actually it was a teenager, who got punched and his nose got broken, and it was all kind of the culminating act of bullying. And instead of asking for punishment, he asked that they be educated. So the bullies had to volunteer with a special needs project and watch a video and take a class, and it was a really neat idea to use a bad situation to become better. So there's lots of creative ways to address it. One of my favorite ways to deal with bullying is to preload your child with comebacks. So I gave a few examples, but basically you run through scenarios and have your child practice saying in the flattest, least upset way possible whatever you've rehearsed. And that way your child can get through the situation without giving the bully what he wants, because let's face it, the bully wants a reaction. So if you can train your child to not react and then go privately let it out, because it's okay to feel sad, but if you can give your child the ability to have that self-control and to have like a quick response in the moment, chances are it's not going to be very much fun for the bully, and they're going to move on because it's just not giving them what they want. So that's been huge, and practice, practice, practice. with your child, you know, if they are experiencing that sort of deal and it's something that you think, you know, may go away with certain bullies but may come back in the next school year or with different kids, and that's something that you can preload them with, and then they're ready because you can't go to school with them. Couple more considerations. Don't ever talk about your kid in front of your kid unless you're willing to explain things, because it's very demoralizing to hear the patient has cavernous foot and hereditary neuropathy as a child and not know what those things mean, because like we talked about earlier, if you're setting up your understanding of the world through experiences and you hear these things that you don't really understand, often, most of the time, the kid's not going to Google it. They're just going to walk away with the understanding that something's wrong with me. I'm broken. And that's not what you want to do. You want to explain, this is what's going on, and we have all these options. Or this is what's going on, but look at all these great things that you have. You know, make sure that you can use those doctor and school meetings as a good setup.